Commander Sarah Chun kept her eyes down as the Valoran tribunal filed into the massive chamber. Her dark hair was pulled back in the tight regulation bun that human captives were required to wear. The metal restraints around her wrists felt cold against her skin, but she had grown used to the weight over the past 3 months. The Valerans towered above every other species in the Galactic Confederation. Their purple-scaled skin gleamed under the chamber's harsh lights, and their forearms moved with practiced authority as they took their seats. To them, humans were barely worth notice. A primitive species that had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel. A race so weak that they could not even defend their own home system. "Bring forward the human criminal," announced High Arbitrator Zethkal. His voice booming through the chamber's translation systems. Sarah shuffled forward, her shackled feet making small scraping sounds on the polished floor. Around her, representatives from dozens of alien species filled the viewing galleries. She could hear their whispered conversations, most in languages she recognized from her years in diplomatic service. "Look how small it is," someone murmured in Helixian. "I heard their whole fleet surrendered." "After losing just 6 ships," another voice added in Quantum. Standard. Sarah let them talk. She had learned long ago that being underestimated was often more valuable than being feared. The Valerans had conquered human space in what they called the 3-Day War. Humanity's combined fleet had indeed surrendered quickly, but not for the reasons these aliens believed. "State your designation." "Human," High Arbitrator Zethkal commanded. "Commander Sarah Chun." "Serial number 7749 Delta Prime." "Terran Diplomatic Corps," she replied in a steady voice. The arbitrator's secondary arms gestured dismissively. "You stand accused of sabotage, espionage, and inciting rebellion among the lower castes. How do you answer these charges?" Sarah raised her head slightly, just enough to meet the High Arbitrator's burning yellow eyes. "I was performing my duties as assigned by the Terran government." A ripple of what might have been laughter moved through the alien audience. The Valerans considered humans so primitive that they referred to all human activities as assigned duties, like training animals to perform tricks. "Your duties," Zethkal said, his mouth parts curling in what passed for a sneer among his species, "consisted of cleaning waste processing units and maintaining atmospheric scrubbers. Hardly the work of a commander." Sarah nodded slowly. "Yes, Arbitrator. That was my assignment." What none of them knew was that those waste processing units and atmospheric scrubbers existed throughout every Valoran ship, station, and colony world. While Sarah cleaned and maintained them, she had also been mapping, recording, and quietly installing modifications that would prove useful when the time came. High Arbitrator Zethkal activated a holographic display showing Sarah's work assignments over the past 3 months. "Yet our security forces discovered modified components in 17 different systems. Components that bear the chemical signature of human manufacturing techniques." The evidence was damning, and Sarah did not deny it. She had been careful, but not careful enough to avoid detection forever. That had never been the point. The point was to gather information and position assets before anyone realized what she was doing. The modifications were clearly designed to create system failures at predetermined intervals, continued another arbitrator, this one with scarred scales across her face. "Classic sabotage techniques." Sarah remained silent. Let them think they understood human tactics. The modifications would indeed cause system failures, but those failures were not random acts of sabotage. They were precisely timed and located to create maximum chaos when activated simultaneously. Furthermore, Zethkal added, pulling up additional evidence, surveillance recordings show you engaging in unauthorized communication with members of the Kethmori servant caste. This was true as well. The Kethmori were a species of skilled engineers and technicians who had been conquered by the Valoran centuries ago. They now served as the backbone of Valoran technology infrastructure, maintaining and operating systems throughout the Empire. Sarah had indeed spoken with many of them during her work assignments. The Kethmori report that you asked detailed questions about system specifications, maintenance schedules, and security protocols, the scarred arbitrator noted. Information that a waste processor has no legitimate need to know? Sarah shifted slightly, the chains on her ankles clinking softly. She had asked those questions, and the Kethmori had answered them. What the Valerans did not understand was that the Kethmori had been waiting decades for someone to ask the right questions. The Valerans treated their conquered species as tools rather than beings. They provided adequate food and shelter, but no respect, no advancement, and no hope of eventual freedom. After generations of such treatment, many conquered species had begun to dream of rebellion. They simply lacked the means and organization to act on those dreams. Until now. Based on this evidence, High Arbitrator Zethkel declared, we find you guilty of all charges. However, we are prepared to show mercy. He gestured to a smaller alien standing near the chamber's side entrance. Sarah recognized him as Administrator Veltosh, one of the Valerans responsible for managing human populations in the conquered territories. Administrator Veltosh has submitted a proposal for your continued service to the Empire, Zethkel explained. Rather than execution, you would be transferred to a maximum security facility where your technical knowledge could be put to productive use. Veltosh stepped forward, his movements quick and nervous compared to the flowing grace of the High Arbitrators. The human has demonstrated useful skills in system maintenance and modification, he said. These skills could benefit the Empire if properly supervised and directed. Sarah understood what this meant. They wanted to use her knowledge to improve their own systems while keeping her under complete control. It was actually a reasonable offer from their perspective. They would gain valuable intelligence about human technical capabilities while eliminating any threat she might pose. The terms are simple, Zethkel announced. You will submit to neural conditioning that will ensure your complete loyalty to the Empire. Your technical knowledge will be extracted and documented for Imperial use. In exchange, you will live and continue to serve a useful purpose. Neural conditioning was the Valoran equivalent of brainwashing, but much more thorough. The process would strip away her personality, her memories, and her free will, leaving behind only a compliant worker with useful technical skills. It was considered a humane alternative to execution. You have one opportunity to accept this arrangement, the High Arbitrator continued. Refuse and you will be executed immediately as an example to other potential saboteurs. Sarah looked up at the towering purple figures on their raised platform. Around her, hundreds of alien spectators waited for her response. Many seemed to expect her to accept the offer. After all, what choice did a primitive human have when faced with the might of the Valoran Empire? I need a moment to consider, she said quietly. Zethkel's forearms gestured impatiently. There's nothing to consider. Submit to conditioning or face execution. Choose now. Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, she reached up with both hands and began removing the pins that held her hair in its regulation bun. The metal restraints made the movement awkward, but she managed to pull out each pin and let them fall to the floor with tiny metallic sounds. Her long black hair tumbled down past her shoulders, catching the chamber's lights and seeming to shimmer with its own inner fire. It was a small gesture, but something about it made the nearest spectators lean back in their seats. I have made my choice, Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's silence. High Arbitrator Zethkel leaned forward on his platform. Then you accept conditioning? Sarah shook her head, and her loose hair moved like a dark wave around her shoulders. No, Arbitrator. I reject your offer. A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience. Even the High Arbitrators seemed taken aback by her refusal. Then you choose execution? Zethkel stated flatly. No, Sarah replied, and for the first time since entering the chamber, she smiled. I choose revolution? As she spoke those words, something changed in the air around her. The confident murmur of the crowd faded into uncertain silence. High Arbitrator Zethkel's yellow eyes narrowed as he studied her face. Looking for signs of madness or desperation, instead he saw something that made his secondary arms twitch with sudden unease. Sarah Chun was not afraid. She was not desperate. She was calm, confident, and completely in control. "Guard, Captain," Zethkal called, his voice slightly less steady than before. "Prepare for immediate execution?" But as the armored Veloran guards moved toward Sarah, she did something unexpected. She stood straighter, raised her chin, and looked directly into the eyes of every alien in the chamber. Her dark hair framed her face like a warrior's banner, and her smile held secrets that made the crowd instinctively draw back. "You should have accepted my surrender when you had the chance," she said softly. The guards hesitated, suddenly uncertain. Around the chamber, hundreds of alien spectators felt an inexplicable chill run down their spines. Sarah Chun looked like a woman who held all. The first explosion came from the lower levels of the tribunal complex, a deep rumble that shook the massive chamber and sent several alien spectators tumbling from their seats. Emergency lighting bathed everything in pulsing red, and the sound of distant alarms began to fill the air. High Arbitrator Zethkal stumbled as the floor vibrated beneath his feet. "What is happening?" he demanded, his forearms gesturing frantically at the security stations around the chamber's perimeter. Sarah Chun remained perfectly calm in the center of the chaos, her unbound hair moving gently as air currents shifted through the damaged ventilation systems. She watched the Veloran guards, struggling to maintain their formation as more explosions echoed from different sections of the complex. "Status report." Zethkal roared at the nearest security officer. The officer's scaled hands danced over his control panel, but the readouts kept changing faster than he could interpret them. "Multiple system failures across all sectors, High Arbitrator. Power distribution, atmospheric control, communication networks, and transportation grids are all showing critical errors." "How is that possible?" demanded the scarred arbitrator, her voice rising above the growing cacophony of alarms. "Our systems are completely isolated from external networks." Sarah turned to face her, and the arbitrator fell silent at the expression in her eyes. "Your systems were isolated," Sarah said. "But isolation only works if nobody has physical access to modify the hardware." Another explosion, this one much closer, sent a shower of debris falling from the chamber's high ceiling. The alien spectators were beginning to panic now, pushing toward the exits only to find that the automated doors had sealed themselves shut. "The waste processing units," Sarah continued, raising her voice to be heard over the chaos. "The atmospheric scrubbers. The power coupling maintenance panels. Every system I was assigned to clean and maintain over the past 3 months. Did you really think I was just emptying trash containers?" High Arbitrator Zethkal's yellow eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. "Guards, secure the prisoner immediately." But as the armored Valorans moved toward Sarah, the chamber's main lighting grid suddenly failed. Emergency power kicked in a second later, but in that brief moment of darkness, something fundamental had changed. When the lights returned, Sarah Chun was no longer shackled. The restraints lay on the floor at her feet, their locking mechanisms somehow deactivated. She stood with her hands free, her hair flowing around her shoulders like a dark banner, and her eyes reflecting the red emergency lights with an intensity that made the approaching guards hesitate. "How did you—" Zethkal began, but Sarah cut him off with a gesture. "Magnetic locks are wonderful technology," she said conversationally. "So much more secure than physical keys. Unless, of course, someone has been slowly building an electromagnetic pulse generator into the building's power grid over the past 3 months." She reached into her hair and withdrew several small objects that looked like decorative pins. The guards had searched her thoroughly before the trial, but they had paid no attention to the simple metal pins that held her regulation hairstyle in place. "Crystalline matrix storage devices," Sarah explained as she arranged the pins in a specific pattern on the floor. "Your own technology, actually. Amazing how much data you can store in something the size of a hairpin when you know what you're doing." The pins began to glow with soft blue light, and suddenly the air around Sarah shimmered as a holographic display materialized above them. The display showed a three-dimensional map of the entire tribunal complex, with hundreds of red dots blinking throughout the structure. Each red dot represents a modification I made to your systems, Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly despite the ongoing alarms. 17 that your security forces found. 432 that they didn't? Administrator Veltosh stepped forward, his nervous energy now transformed into obvious fear. That's impossible. You are under constant surveillance. Every action was monitored and recorded. Sarah smiled at him and he took an involuntary step backward. Your surveillance systems recorded exactly what I wanted them to record. The modifications were made during routine maintenance operations, using standard Valoran tools and components. From your camera's perspective, I was simply doing my assigned duties with exceptional thoroughness. The holographic map expanded, showing not just the tribunal complex but the entire Valoran installation on this world. More red dots appeared, thousands of them, scattered throughout every major system and structure. The beauty of waste processing units, Sarah continued, is that they connect to every inhabited area of your facilities. Atmospheric scrubbers touch every life support system. Power coupling maintenance panels provide access to your entire electrical grid. You gave me the keys to your entire infrastructure and asked me to polish them. High Arbitrator Zethkel finally found his voice. Even if what you claim is true, you are still one human against an entire empire. Your small acts of sabotage cannot— His words were cut off as every screen in the chamber suddenly activated, displaying the same image, a view of orbital space above the planet, where shapes were emerging from faster-than-light jumps, ships, hundreds of them, but these were not Valoran vessels. The designs were unfamiliar to most of the aliens in the chamber, but Sarah recognized them immediately. Long, sleek hulls with angular weapon mounts and distinctive engine, configurations that glowed white-hot in the vacuum of space. Human ships. The entire Terran Defense Force fleet, emerging from hyperspace in perfect formation. You see, Sarah said as she watched the stunned expressions around her, humanity's surrender was never quite what it appeared to be. The holographic display changed, now showing fleet movements throughout Valoran space. On world after world, system after system, the same pattern was repeating. Human ships dropping out of hyperspace, moving to secure positions around Valoran installations that were suddenly experiencing massive system failures. We studied your empire for months before you ever heard of Earth, Sarah explained. We identified your strengths, your weaknesses, and your standard operating procedures. We knew that you would conquer human space quickly and efficiently, because that's what you always do. We also knew that you would immediately begin exploiting human labor to maintain your infrastructure, because that's what you always do. Another series of explosions rocked the building, but these were more controlled than the earlier blasts. Precision charges designed to disable specific systems without causing unnecessary casualties. So we gave you a surrender that looked convincing. A fleet that retreated just quickly enough to seem defeated, but not so quickly that you would be suspicious. A population that submitted to your occupation with exactly the right amount of resistance to satisfy your expectations. The chamber's main entrance suddenly burst open as figures in combat armor poured through. But these were not Valoran security forces. The armor was sleek and black, with distinctive human design elements and weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. And then, Sarah said, as the human strike team took positions around the chamber, we began the most comprehensive intelligence operation in galactic history. The lead figure removed her helmet, revealing a woman with short-cropped gray hair and the weathered face of a career soldier. Commander Chun, she said with a crisp salute. Operation Deep Clean is proceeding as planned. We have secured the primary installation and disabled their communication grid. Thank you, Colonel Morrison, Sarah replied. What's the status of the other objectives? All primary targets have been neutralized. The Kethmori engineering teams activated the modified systems exactly on schedule. Valoran command and control capabilities have been effectively severed across 17 star systems. High Arbitrator Zethkel stared at the human soldiers surrounding him. his forearms hanging limply at his sides. "This is impossible," he whispered. "You are a primitive species. Your technology is inferior to ours in every measurable way." Sarah walked over to where he sat, her movement casual but somehow predatory. "You're absolutely right," she said. "Our technology is inferior. Our ships are slower. Our weapons are weaker. Our armor is less advanced." She leaned closer, and he could see his own reflection in her dark eyes. "But you made one critical mistake in your assessment of humanity." "What mistake?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Sarah straightened up, and her smile was sharp as a blade. "You assumed that superior technology would always defeat superior strategy." The holographic display changed again, now showing a detailed breakdown of the operation. Months of preparation. Thousands of human agents positioned throughout Veloran space. A coordinated campaign of sabotage and intelligence gathering that had penetrated every level of the empires. Infrastructure. The Kethmori have been waiting for centuries for someone to offer them a real chance at freedom, Sarah explained. The Helixians have been documenting Veloran military patterns for decades, hoping to find weaknesses. The Quantum Collective has been secretly developing new technologies that they were forced to hide from your inspectors. She gestured to the chaos around them as more human soldiers secured the chamber. You built an empire based on intimidation and technological superiority, but you never bothered to earn the loyalty of your subjects. 6 months later, Sarah Chun stood on the observation deck of Unity Station, watching as ships from dozens of different species arrived for the first Galactic Congress in over 3 centuries. The massive space station had been built from the wreckage of Veloran command ships. Transformed from symbols of oppression into a beacon of cooperation, her hair was still unbound, flowing freely around her shoulders as it had been since that day in the tribunal chamber. She had received numerous suggestions from diplomatic advisors about adopting a more formal appearance for the historic proceedings, but Sarah had politely declined. Her loose hair had become a symbol throughout the galaxy, representing the moment when humanity refused to submit and chose to fight instead. "The Helixian delegation has just arrived," reported Lieutenant Torres, approaching with a data pad in his hands. "Their ambassador specifically requested to meet with you before the opening ceremonies." Sarah nodded, still watching the steady stream of ships approaching the station. Each vessel represented a species that had once been conquered by the Valorans, now arriving as equals to participate in shaping the galaxy's future. "What about the Valoran representatives?" she asked. "They're already aboard," Torres replied. High Arbitrator Zethkal has been assigned as their chief negotiator. He seemed subdued when he arrived. Sarah smiled at that. The former High Arbitrator had experienced a dramatic change in perspective over the past 6 months. Watching his empire crumble in the space of a single day had taught him valuable lessons about the difference between ruling through fear and leading through respect. The doors to the observation deck slid open, and Admiral Rebecca Santos entered. Sarah's former commanding officer had been promoted to lead the new Terran diplomatic fleet, the force responsible for maintaining peace during the transition period. "Commander Chun," Santos said with a warm smile. "Or should I say Ambassador Chun?" Sarah turned to face her old friend. "I'm still getting used to the title," she admitted. 3 months ago, I was a prisoner scheduled for execution. Now I'm representing humanity at the most important diplomatic gathering in galactic history." "You earned it," Santos replied firmly. Operation Deep Clean was the most successful covert action in military history. Not just human military history, galactic military history. The strategy papers are already being studied at academies across 50 star systems. Sarah walked over to the large viewport that dominated the observation deck. Beyond the transparent aluminum, she could see teams of engineers from different species working together to complete the station's construction. Kethmori technicians collaborated with human engineers while Helixian designers worked alongside former Veloran architects. "It wasn't just the military operation," Sarah said thoughtfully. "The real success was convincing the conquered species that cooperation was possible. For centuries, they had been told that the strong must dominate the weak, that unity was impossible between different species. Admiral Santos joined her at the viewport. And now they're building the largest cooperative project in galactic history. The irony is beautiful. Unity Station was more than just a meeting place for the new Congress. It was being designed as a permanent diplomatic and research facility, with sections dedicated to every species in the former Valoran Empire. The station's rotating habitats would provide appropriate environments for beings who breathed different atmospheres, lived under different gravities, and came from radically different worlds. "Admiral," Lieutenant Torres said from the communications console, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the surface. The Kethmori delegation leader is requesting an immediate meeting with Ambassador Chun." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Zalaneth wants to meet before the Congress opens? That's unusual for him." Admiral Santos looked curious. "The Kethmori have been pretty quiet during the preparatory negotiations. They've supported every proposal for species equality, but they haven't pushed for anything specific." "That's because they've been working on something big," Sarah said. "Zalaneth contacted me last week about a special project, but he was very secretive about the details." Torres looked up from his console. "The transmission includes a request for you to meet them in Engineering Section 7. He says it's time to reveal their surprise." Sarah straightened her civilian diplomatic uniform and headed for the door. "Tell him I'll be there in 10 minutes. And ask Colonel Morrison to join us if this involves Kethmori engineering. We want our best technical people present." 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself in one of the station's massive engineering bays, staring at something that defied her understanding of known technology. The device filled most of the bay's central workspace. A complex arrangement of crystalline matrices and energy conduits that pulsed with soft blue light. Zalaneth approached her, his forearms moving in the elaborate greeting gesture of his people. The Kethmori were similar in size to humans, but their scaled skin changed color to reflect their emotions. Right now, Zalaneth's scales showed the deep purple of excitement mixed with the gold of nervous anticipation. "Ambassador Chun," he said, his voice carrying the musical quality of his species' vocal cords. "Thank you for coming. What you see here is the result of 3 centuries of secret research." Colonel Morrison, who had arrived just ahead of Sarah, was already scanning the device with her technical instruments. "The energy readings are unlike anything in our databases," she reported. "But the design principles seem familiar somehow." Zalaneth's scales shifted to show pride mixed with satisfaction. "That is because the fundamental concepts are human in origin," he explained. "When your scientists first achieved faster-than-light travel, they published their research in the galactic scientific journals. Most species ignored those papers because human technology was considered primitive." He gestured toward the device with obvious reverence. "But we studied every detail. We saw the elegance of human engineering, the way you solve complex problems with simple, efficient solutions. Over the centuries, we have been refining and improving upon those concepts." Sarah stepped closer to the device, noting how its crystalline components seemed to respond to her presence. "What does it do?" "It is a communication array," Zalaneth said, his scales now showing pure excitement. "Not for transmitting messages between ships or planets, but for connecting minds across galactic distances. Instantaneous communication, regardless of range." Colonel Morrison's instruments began beeping rapidly as the device's energy output increased. "Ambassador, the power levels are climbing beyond our measurement capabilities." Zalaneth moved to a control panel covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change as Sarah watched. "The array responds to specific neural patterns," he explained. "We calibrated it based on recordings of your brainwaves from the tribunal chamber. The moment when you chose revolution over submission created a unique pattern that we have been able to replicate." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "You want me to test this device?" "Not test," Zalaneth corrected. "Activate." "The array is complete, but it requires a specific type of mental focus to initialize. The same focus that allowed you to coordinate a galaxy-wide rebellion while pretending to be a helpless prisoner." Admiral Santos, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward. What exactly would this device allow us to accomplish? Zalaneth's scales showed deep satisfaction. Real-time communication between any species anywhere in the galaxy. No more delays caused by transmission time between distant star systems. No more misunderstandings caused by language barriers. The array translates thought patterns directly, making true communication possible between any intelligent beings. The implications hit Sarah immediately. This could revolutionize galactic diplomacy, she breathed. No more war because of miscommunication. No more isolation between distant species. More than that, Zalaneth said. The array can network multiple minds together, allowing unprecedented levels of cooperation and understanding. Imagine engineers from 50 different species working together on the same project, sharing thoughts and ideas instantaneously. Colonel Morrison finished her scans and looked up with amazement in her eyes. The theoretical applications are staggering. Scientific research, exploration, even art and culture could be shared in ways we never imagined. Sarah looked around the engineering bay at the representatives from different species who had gathered to watch the demonstration. All of them had been subjects of the Valoran Empire just months ago. Now they were working together to create something that could change the galaxy forever. How do we know it's safe? She asked. Zl single quotes Neth single quotes S scales showed understanding mixed with determination. We have tested it extensively on volunteers from our own species. The process is completely harmless and the mental connection can be terminated at any time by the user. He gestured toward the device's main interface, a crystalline panel that glowed with soft light. But we need someone with the right neural patterns to establish the initial network. Someone who has already demonstrated the ability to coordinate complex operations across multiple species and star systems. Sarah looked at the faces around her. Humans, Kethmori, Helixians, and even a few reformed Valerans all working together toward a common goal. 6 months ago, most of these species had never spoken to each other as EQ.